This video is brought to you by Brilliant. On Thursday last week, it was announced that the UK had fallen into recession. This comes after a particularly tough year, in which people continued to struggle with the cost of living crisis. As a result, households and businesses have cut back on spending, and this limited economic activity, especially around the Christmas period, resulted in the UK economy contracting in the second half of the year. This is particularly damaging for the Prime Minister, though, who began 2023 by setting out his 5 priorities for the year, the second of which was to grow the economy. In announcing these, Sunak asked the country to judge us on the effort we put in and the results we achieve. So what does the data actually say? How damaging is this for Sunak? Will this be one of the final nails in Rishi Sunak's political coffin, or is the news just not actually as bad as it may seem? Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. Now, before we get into all that, we first need to understand what's just happened. As we mentioned at the start, on Thursday the 15th of February, the Office for National Statistics, or ONS, stated that gross domestic product, or GDP, fell by about 0.3% in the 3 months leading up to December, i.e. the fourth quarter of 2023. As the UK's GDP declined by 0.1% in the third quarter of 2023, this meant that GDP had fallen for 2 successive quarters, which meant that the definition of a technical recession had been met. Across the second half of the year, the ONS estimated that the UK economy contracted by a cumulative 0.5%. Discussing how this happened, the ONS pointed out that households felt under pressure from high prices and high borrowing costs, the latter of which we'll get onto in a second. Liz McCohen, the Director of Economic Statistics at the ONS, pointed out that all the main sectors fell on the quarter, with manufacturing, construction and wholesale being the biggest drags on growth, partially offset by increases in hotels and rentals of vehicles and machinery. Ultimately, though, one of the biggest contributing factors to the recession are high interest rates, with the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt going as far as to suggest that the recession is to be expected as a result of these high rates, with them currently standing at 5.25%. This means that borrowing money, for individuals and businesses alike, is more expensive, which discourages spending and ultimately hurts growth. Now, if we average out the growth figures from all quarters of 2023, the ONS estimates that UK GDP actually rose by 0.1% last year, though this is the weakest performance since 2009 during the financial crisis, and it doesn't include the 2020 COVID anomaly. On top of this, if you look on a per capita basis, GDP per capita fell for a 7th consecutive quarter, which, according to the Resolution Foundation, is the longest period of continuous decline on record, going back to 1955. Now, in relation to the latest data, it's worth saying that there are some reasons why Rishi Sunak might not be too pessimistic. For example, the Governor of the Bank of England himself has stated that there are distinct signs of an upturn, and that the recession might already be over by this point, adding that this might be one of the mildest starts to a recession the UK has had.
If you look at recessions going back to the 1970s, this is the weakest by a long way, because the range, I think, for the numbers for those 2 quarter numbers for all the previous recessions was something like 2.5% to 22% in terms of lost negative GDP. So minus 0.5 is a very weak recession.
Additionally, as we stated earlier, one of the main reasons that the UK is in recession is because of high interest rates. Interest rates are an issue for the Bank of England, which is operationally independent from the government. Essentially then, if it were not for its 5 pledges, Sunak could try and argue firstly that the recession is only mild, and secondly that it isn't necessarily entirely his fault, as it's the Bank of England's decision to keep interest rates high, and that things could turn around soon. This wouldn't have been a get-out-of-jail-free card though. His critics would still blame him for the recession, but it would have given him at least a bit of political cover. In addition to this, a stagnant economy is an issue that far predates Sunak. This inflation-adjusted graph demonstrates just how weak UK economic growth has been since the 2008 financial crisis. Over the past 15 years, the UK's GDP per capita has grown on average just 0.5% a year, a rate 5 times smaller than the growth rate in the preceding decade and a half. But with Sunak putting so much weight on his efforts to grow the economy, and by making it one of his 5 pledges, he's basically given his political opponents a prime opportunity to wield the recession against him. In fact, the Labour Party has already started to do this.
Our economy is now smaller than when Rishi Sunak entered 10 Downing Street in 2022. Having spent years in the slow lane, Rishi Sunak has now put our economy into reverse. This is Rishi's recession.
On top of this, the Labour Party media team have really lent into this, with them putting out multiple graphics referring to it as Rishi's recession. So, Sunak's rivals have already been using the recession as a way of attacking the Prime Minister and the government. However, they're also using it to demonstrate that he's failed in another of his 5 pledges. So far, only the very first of his pledges, to halve inflation, has been definitively met. Debt has not been falling, nor has the NHS waiting list, and the boats have not been stopped. The addition to this of not just a stagnant economy, but one, at least for now, in recession, only gives Labour more ammo in the lead-up to the next general election. They're now able to point to the list of things that Sunak thought were the most important issues in the country and demonstrate that he's not succeeded at rectifying them. This is only made worse when you consider that Sunak's whole shtick when running against Liz Truss in the summer 2022 leadership election was that he was the candidate that could be trusted on the economy. When Truss's leadership imploded as a result largely of her economic policy, he was brought on precisely because of his economic credibility. And the data suggests that the public are losing confidence in him. Since October 2022, the proportion of people who trust Sunak to make the right decisions on the economy have fallen from 50% to 29%, with more people now trusting Keir Starmer. Specifically on his economic growth pledge, some 69% of people, according to the latest YouGov polling, think his government is doing badly. The fact we're now in recession, even with all of its caveats, won't help this, and will damage Sunak's economic credibility even further. Luckily for Sunak, though, with his party more than 20 points behind in the polls, the task of ending the UK's status as a stagnation nation will soon fall to the Labour Party. A lot of stuff we talk about in our videos can often seem pretty complicated, especially when we dive deep into detailed data and economics. But there's a fun and easy way for you to learn more about these topics, which doesn't cost thousands of dollars or take years and years of studying. That's because Brilliant is the best way to learn maths, data science, and computer science interactively. And the fun thing is, it doesn't take long to learn either. These complex topics are broken down into small and accessible chunks, designed around your busy schedule, whatever your skill level. That means that if you spend just a few minutes a day, you can gain new knowledge over time, in an actually fun way. As time goes on, you'll get used to that feeling of learning too, because this isn't just about sitting down and reading. Brilliant teaches you by doing, using active learning to teach you the principles of otherwise quite complex topics, and ensuring you understand what's actually going on. So whether you want to brush up on your basic math skills, improve your employment prospects by learning about future technology, or just have fun with coding, then you can check out everything that Brilliant has to offer for free for 30 days by clicking the link below. Plus, the first 200 of you that sign up will get 20% off Brilliant's premium annual subscription. Thanks for your support.